It was a bright and sunny morning in the suburban town of Springdale. Alicia Monroe, a 28-year-old woman in her third trimester of pregnancy, parked her car near the local grocery store. She needed a few essentials before heading home to prepare for her baby shower later that weekend. Her car was slightly over the white line of the parking spot, but she figured it wouldn't matter since the lot wasn't full. As Alicia stepped out of her car, balancing her purse and keys, a police car pulled into the parking lot. Officer Trent Rogers, known in the community for his no-nonsense approach, stepped out and approached her with a stern look. Alicia immediately noticed his tense posture and sighed quietly, preparing to explain the situation. "Ma'am, do you realize your car is parked illegally?" Rogers said, his voice sharp. Alicia turned to face him, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "Officer, I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize. I'm just running in quickly to grab a few things. I'll move it if it's a problem." Her calm and polite response didn't seem to diffuse Roger's agitation. He looked at her car, then back at her. "It's not about moving it now, ma'am. It's about following the rules. Everyone else here parked properly. Why couldn't you?" Alicia, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her, took a deep breath. "I understand, officer. I'll make sure to park correctly next time." Roger's tone grew harsher. "Next time? You're already breaking the law now." The exchange began to draw attention from other shoppers in the parking lot. A few people paused to watch, sensing the tension. Alicia tried to stay calm, but the officer's raised voice and accusatory tone made her uneasy. "Officer, I'm pregnant," Alicia said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm just trying to do my shopping and get home." But Rogers wasn't listening. His assumptions and biases clouded his judgment. "Pregnant or not, the law is the law," he snapped. "And it seems like you think it doesn't apply to you." Before Alicia could respond, Rogers took a step closer, his presence looming. The situation escalated quickly. Rogers grabbed her arm, pulling her away from her car. Alicia stumbled, her balance compromised by her pregnancy. She cried out, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "Hey, stop!" shouted a man nearby. He had been recording the interaction on his phone, realizing that things were getting out of hand. Ignoring the bystander, Rogers continued, his frustration boiling over. He pushed Alicia to the ground, and she landed on the pavement with a thud, clutching her stomach in pain. To the shock of everyone watching, he kicked her side, ordering her to stay down. Gasps and shouts erupted from the onlookers. "What are you doing? She's pregnant," a woman yelled, rushing toward Alicia but stopping short, fearful of the officer's reaction. Alicia lay on the ground, her face twisted in pain and tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "I'm not a threat. I just want to go home." The bystander with the phone kept recording, ensuring there was evidence of what had happened. He called out to Rogers, "You're out of line, officer. This is going online." Rogers, realizing the attention he was attracting, finally stepped back. "Stay out of this," he barked, glaring at the man. But it was too late. The video had already captured everything. An ambulance arrived soon after, called by another witness. Paramedics carefully helped Alicia onto a stretcher, assuring her that they would check both her and her baby. As she was taken away, the crowd began murmuring, their outrage simmering. The bystander uploaded the video to social media, and within hours, it had gone viral. The seeds of a battle for justice had been planted, and Alicia's story was about to ignite a firestorm of public outcry. The hospital was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines in Alicia's room. She lay on the bed, her hands resting protectively over her belly. The doctors had assured her that her baby was safe, but the bruises on her side and the emotional pain she felt were impossible to ignore. Her mind replayed the incident in the parking lot over and over, each moment more surreal than the last. Her brother, Marcus Monroe, a successful lawyer known for his calm yet determined demeanor, walked into the room. His face was a mixture of worry and anger. He placed a gentle hand on Alicia's shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Alicia nodded weakly. "The baby is fine," she said, "but I can't believe what happened. He didn't even listen to me, Marcus. He just saw what he wanted to see." Marcus sat down beside her, his jaw tightening as he listened. "I saw the video, Alicia," he said. "It's everywhere. People are outraged. What that officer did was unacceptable, and he will be held accountable. I'll make sure of it." The video, filmed by a brave bystander, had gone viral within hours of the incident. Social media platforms were flooded with posts condemning Officer Trent Rogers' actions. The hashtags #JusticeForAlicia and #EndPolice Brutality began trending nationwide. People from all walks of life were sharing their outrage, demanding justice for Alicia and her unborn child. Back at the police department, the atmosphere was tense. Officer Rogers sat in the break room, scrolling through his phone and seeing the flood of negative comments directed at him. His actions had sparked a firestorm, and he was beginning to feel the weight of the consequences. The police chief, a stern but fair woman named Angela Carter, called Rogers into her office. She sat behind her desk, her eyes narrowing as she reviewed the footage of the incident. "Rogers, what were you thinking?" she asked, her voice sharp. "This is unacceptable. You've put the entire department in a difficult position." Rogers tried to defend himself, but his excuses sounded hollow. She was resisting. "Chief, I felt threatened." Angela slammed her hand on the desk. "Threatened? By a pregnant woman? Do you even hear yourself? This is not what we stand for." Meanwhile, Marcus was hard at work gathering evidence to build a case against Rogers. He had spoken to witnesses, reviewed the video footage, and documented Alicia's injuries. His legal team was working tirelessly, determined to bring justice to his sister. "I'm not just doing this for Alicia," Marcus told his team during a meeting. "I'm doing this for every person who has been mistreated and ignored. This has to stop." In the community, the outrage was palpable. Protests began to form outside the police department, with people holding signs that read "Justice for Alicia" and "No more abuse of power." Families, students, and activists came together, their voices united in demanding change. Alicia watched the news from her hospital bed, tears streaming down her face as she saw the support pouring in. She couldn't believe how many people cared about what had happened to her. "Marcus," she said when he visited later that evening, "I'm scared, but I'm also hopeful. Maybe this will make a difference. Maybe this will finally open people's eyes." Marcus smiled at her, his eyes filled with determination. "It will, Alicia. You're stronger than you know, and we're going to fight this together." As night fell, the city buzzed with anticipation. The stage was set for a battle that would test the strength of a community, the resolve of a family, and the integrity of a system meant to protect. This part focuses on the immediate aftermath of the incident, building on the tension and emotions from Part 1. It introduces key characters and their roles in the story while maintaining an engaging and respectful tone. The narrative sets up the growing momentum for justice, keeping readers invested in what happens next. The days following the incident brought a whirlwind of activity. Alicia had been discharged from the hospital, but her life was far from returning to normal. The video of her ordeal had sparked outrage, and her name was now at the center of a growing movement for justice. While she tried to focus on her recovery and her unborn baby, the world outside her door was rallying around her story. Marcus Monroe, Alicia's brother, worked tirelessly. His law firm became the hub for legal action and media coordination. Every morning, Marcus and his team reviewed new developments. Witnesses who had been at the scene came forward, eager to support Alicia. The bystander who had recorded the video agreed to testify, and several people sent additional footage from different angles. "This is bigger than just one case," Marcus told his team during a strategy meeting. "We're fighting for accountability for every family who has ever been ignored or mistreated." Meanwhile, Alicia's home became a refuge for close friends and family. They'd brought her meals, checked on her health, and kept her company. Alicia felt overwhelmed by the support but was still shaken by the experience. One afternoon, the local journalist, Rachel Carter, came by to interview Alicia. Marcus had arranged it, knowing Alicia's voice would inspire others. Sitting on her couch, Alicia spoke softly, but firmly as the camera recorded her. "I didn't think I would be at the center of something like this," Alicia said, her hands resting on her belly. "But if my story can help bring change, then I'll be strong. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who deserves to feel safe." The interview aired that evening and quickly gained traction. Alicia's calm demeanor and heartfelt words resonated with viewers across the country. Donations poured in to support her legal case, and organizations advocating for justice reached out to offer help. At the same time, protests outside the police department grew larger. The community's frustration with Officer Trent Rogers and the department's initial lack of response boiled over. People of all ages and backgrounds came together, holding signs with messages like "Justice for Alicia" and "Stop Abuse of Power." Inside the department, tensions were high. Officer Rogers had been placed on administrative leave, but the growing backlash put pressure on the entire force. Chief Angela Carter held a press conference to address the public's concerns. "We are committed to a full investigation," Chief Carter said, standing before a sea of reporters. "The actions shown in the video are deeply troubling and do not reflect the values of our department. We will ensure accountability." However, many in the community remained skeptical. Words weren't enough. They wanted action. As the legal case progressed, Marcus prepared Alicia for the challenges ahead. "You'll have to relive that day when we go to court," he said gently. "But you're not alone. We're all behind you." Alicia nodded, her determination growing stronger. "If it helps even one person avoid what I went through, it'll be worth it." Back at the law firm, Marcus received a surprising visitor. It was one of Officer Rogers' colleagues, an officer named Daniel Hayes. Hayes had seen the video and was troubled by what had happened. "I can't stay silent," Hayes told Marcus. "What Rogers did was wrong, and I'm willing to testify against him if needed. This isn't what we stand for." Marcus thanked Hayes, realizing the case was gaining even more strength. With every piece of evidence, every witness, and every voice speaking out, their fight for justice became more powerful. The movement continued to grow, and Alicia's story became a symbol of resilience and unity. People from neighboring towns joined the protests, and social media kept the conversation alive. As the momentum built, the stakes grew higher, but so did the hope for a better future. As the days passed, the fight for justice gained even more momentum. Marcus Monroe, Alicia's brother, spent every waking hour preparing for the legal battle ahead. His office was filled with case files, videos, and witness statements. His dedication was fueled by his love for his sister and his determination to hold Officer Trent Rogers accountable. Meanwhile, Alicia continued her recovery at home. She still felt pain from the bruises, but the emotional scars were harder to heal. The support from her family, friends, and even strangers gave her strength, but she knew the road ahead would be difficult. One evening, Marcus visited Alicia to discuss the case. Sitting across from her at the dining table, he laid out the plan. "We've got solid evidence, Alicia," he said, pointing to a folder filled with documents. "The video, the witness testimonies, your medical records, it all paints a clear picture of what happened." Alicia nodded, her hands resting on her baby bump. "I just want to make sure no one else has to go through this," she said. "If my story can help change things, then it's worth it." Marcus smiled at her determination. "That's exactly why we're doing this," he said. The community's support also continued to grow. Protests outside the police department became larger, with people chanting, holding signs, and demanding accountability. Local leaders and activists joined the cause, making speeches about the need for reform. The media remained heavily involved, keeping the story in the headlines. News outlets interviewed Alicia, Marcus, and community members, further amplifying the message. One evening, Alicia's interview aired on national television, and her heartfelt words moved viewers across the country. "I don't hate anyone. Alicia said during the interview. But I do believe in justice. What happened to me wasn't right, and it can't happen again. I want my child to grow up in a world where they feel safe. Meanwhile, at the police department, tensions were high. Officer Trent Rogers was under internal investigation, but many officers felt the weight of the public scrutiny. Chief Angela Carter held another press conference to address the growing unrest. "We are committed to transparency and accountability," she said firmly. "This department will not tolerate any actions that go against our values. The investigation is ongoing and appropriate actions will be taken." While Chief Carter's words brought some reassurance, the community remained vigilant. They knew words weren't enough. They wanted real change. Marcus also received a key breakthrough in the case. Officer Daniel Hayes, a colleague of Rogers, had stepped forward to testify. Hayes had been deeply disturbed by what he saw in the video and wanted to ensure justice was served. "What Rogers did doesn't represent who we are as officers," Hayes told Marcus during a meeting. "I want to help in any way I can." Hayes' testimony was a game changer. As someone within the department, his words carried significant weight. Marcus included Hayes' statement in the growing pile of evidence, knowing it would strengthen their case in court. Back at Alicia's home, her friends and family continued to rally around her. They encouraged her to stay strong and reminded her of the impact her story was having. Alicia felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, fear, and determination. "I never wanted this kind of attention," she told her best friend, Michelle, one afternoon. "But if it means something good can come out of it, I'll face it head on." As the legal team finalized their preparations, the first court date was announced. The news spread quickly, and the community prepared to show their support in any way they could. Alicia felt a surge of both anxiety and hope. The stage was set for a courtroom battle that would not only determine justice for Alicia, but also send a message about accountability, fairness, and the need for change. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the city buzzed with anticipation. People gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs of support for Alicia Monroe. The air was filled with chants of justice for Alicia. As community members stood together, their voices strong and united. Inside the courthouse, Alicia sat with her brother Marcus and his legal team. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her hands nervously resting on her baby bump. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "You've got this, Alicia. Just tell the truth. The evidence speaks for itself." Alicia nodded, drawing strength from his words. She looked around the courtroom, noticing the many people who had come to support her. Friends, family, and even strangers sat in the gallery, offering her silent encouragement with their presence. On the other side of the courtroom, Officer Trent Rogers sat stiffly with his lawyer. His expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of unease in his eyes. He had seen the public backlash and knew his career and reputation were on the line. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. After the formalities, Marcus stood to deliver his opening statement. His voice was calm but powerful, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Your Honor, what happened to my sister, Alicia Monroe, was not just an act of injustice. It was an abuse of power," Marcus began. "The evidence will show that Officer Rogers acted without reason, using unnecessary force against a pregnant woman who posed no threat. Today, we seek accountability and justice." The prosecution presented their case, starting with the video footage of the incident. The courtroom watched in silence as the screen showed Rogers' harsh treatment of Alicia. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as the footage played, the impact undeniable. Next, witnesses were called to the stand. The bystander who recorded the video testified first, describing what he had seen that day. "She wasn't doing anything wrong," he said firmly. "She was calm, and she tried to explain. But the officer didn't listen. What he did was completely unnecessary." Other witnesses, including shoppers and employees from the grocery store, shared similar accounts. Their testimonies painted a clear picture of what had happened, further strengthening the case. When it was Alicia's turn to testify, she took a deep breath and walked to the stand. Her voice trembled at first, But she quickly found her composure. "I was just trying to get some groceries," she said. "I wasn't looking for trouble. I told the officer I would move my car, but he didn't listen. I was scared for my baby." Her words were raw and emotional, moving many in the courtroom to tears. Even the judge seemed affected by her testimony, nodding solemnly as she spoke. The defense tried to argue that Rogers felt threatened and acted out of concern for his safety. But their argument fell flat against the overwhelming evidence. Officer Daniel Hayes' testimony further dismantled their case. Hayes spoke with conviction, stating that Rogers' actions were unprofessional and unjustified. "This isn't what we stand for," Hayes said. "As officers, we're here to protect and serve, not to intimidate or harm." As the day progressed, it became clear that the case was leaning heavily in Alicia's favor. The defense struggled to counter the powerful evidence and testimonies, while Marcus continued to present a strong and compelling argument for justice. When the court adjourned for the day, Alicia felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She returned home to rest, knowing that the fight wasn't over, but feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. Marcus reassured her, saying, "We're on the right track, Alicia. Stay strong. We're almost there." Outside the courthouse, the crowd cheered as Alicia and Marcus walked out. Their fight for justice had become a symbol of hope for many, and the momentum continued to build as the trial moved forward. The courtroom was packed as the trial continued into its second day. Tensions were high, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Marcus Monroe stood confidently at the plaintiff's table, flipping through his notes while Alicia sat beside him. Her nerves were visible, but the support of her brother and the crowd outside gave her strength. The morning began with additional witness testimonies. A young woman, a cashier at the grocery store, took the stand. She nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she glanced at Alicia. "I saw everything," she said. Alicia was calm. She didn't do anything wrong. The officer, he was yelling, and he didn't even give her a chance to explain. It was scary to watch. Her words added yet another layer to the case, painting a picture of unnecessary aggression from Officer Rogers. Marcus thanked her for her bravery as she stepped down. Next, Marcus called a medical expert to the stand. The doctor who treated Alicia after the incident explained the injuries she sustained. He described the bruising on her abdomen and ribs, emphasizing the potential risk to her unborn child. The actions taken against Mrs. Monroe could have had severe consequences for her and her baby, the doctor said firmly. "It's fortunate there was no lasting harm, but it doesn't excuse what happened." The defense, led by Officer Rogers' attorney, tried to poke holes in the case. They questioned witnesses aggressively and attempted to justify Rogers' actions as necessary force. But their arguments grew weaker as the evidence mounted against them. The turning point came when Marcus called Officer Daniel Hayes to testify. Hayes had been hesitant at first, knowing the potential backlash he might face from his peers. But his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. Hayes walked to the stand, his uniform crisp and his demeanor calm. He spoke clearly, recounting what he saw in the video and how Rogers' behavior violated department protocols. "As officers, we're trained to de-escalate situations," Hayes said. "What I saw in that video was the opposite. There was no threat, no danger. Rogers acted out of line, and his actions were not justified." The courtroom was silent as Hayes spoke. His testimony carried weight, not just because of his position, but because of his integrity. Even the judge seemed impressed by his courage. Marcus leaned over to Alicia and whispered, "This is it. This is what we needed." As the defense scrambled to counter Hayes' testimony, Marcus prepared for his closing arguments. He knew this was his chance to drive the message home and ensure justice for his sister. When it was time, Marcus stood and addressed the jury. His voice was steady, and his words were powerful. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "what happened to my sister was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a deeper issue that affects countless lives. But today, you have the power to make a difference. You can send a message that abuse of power will not be tolerated." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Alicia is not just a victim. She is a mother, a daughter, and a member of this community. She deserves justice, and so do all the others who have suffered in silence. Let this be the day we take a stand. The courtroom erupted in applause as Marcus finished his speech, though the judge quickly called for order. Alicia felt tears welling up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming support and hope that filled the room. As the day ended, Alicia and Marcus left the courthouse to the sound of cheering supporters. The trial wasn't over yet, but they could feel the tide turning in their favor. That evening, Alicia sat with Marcus in her living room, holding his hand. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "thank you. You've done so much for me." Marcus smiled. "This is just the beginning, Alicia. We're going to see this through." The fight for justice was nearing its conclusion, but the journey had already inspired a movement far greater than anyone had expected. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Alicia Monroe sat beside her brother Marcus, her hands trembling slightly as she held them in her lap. Outside, the crowd of supporters waited anxiously, their chants and cheers temporarily replaced by quiet anticipation. The trial had been emotionally draining, but Alicia felt a sense of peace. The evidence, the testimonies, and Marcus' unwavering dedication had given her hope that justice would prevail. The judge cleared his throat and addressed the courtroom. "Before we proceed, I want to commend both parties for their professionalism throughout this trial. The evidence presented has been thorough, and the testimonies have been compelling." Alicia held her breath, her heart pounding. The judge continued, "After reviewing all the evidence and hearing from both sides, it is clear that Officer Trent Rogers' actions were not only unnecessary, but also a blatant abuse of power. The court finds the defendant guilty of misconduct and excessive use of force." The words hit Alicia like a wave of relief. She exhaled deeply, tears streaming down her face. Marcus placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his own expression a mix of pride and gratitude. The judge went on to outline the consequences for Rogers, including his dismissal from the police force and a mandate to undergo extensive training and counseling. Additionally, Alicia was awarded a settlement for the physical and emotional damages she had endured. As the verdict was read, murmurs of approval spread through the courtroom. Some people clapped softly, and others wiped away tears. Officer Rogers sat motionless, his head bowed as he absorbed the weight of the judgment. After the session adjourned, Alicia and Marcus were surrounded by friends and family who had come to support them. Hugs, smiles, and words of encouragement filled the room. Alicia felt overwhelmed by the love and solidarity around her. Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers when they heard the news. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment as Alicia and Marcus stepped out of the courthouse. Microphones and cameras were thrust in their direction, but Marcus raised his hand to quiet the crowd. "My sister stood strong in the face of injustice," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Today, justice has been served, not just for Alicia but for everyone who believes in fairness and accountability. This is a victory for the community, and we hope it inspires change." Alicia stepped forward, her voice soft but determined. "I want to thank everyone who stood by me," she said. "This isn't just my fight. It's our fight. Together, we can make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The crowd responded with applause and chants of "Justice for Alicia." The energy was electric, a reflection of the community's resilience and determination to create a better future. In the days that followed, the case became a catalyst for change. Local officials announced new policies to improve police accountability and strengthen community relations. Marcus worked with advocacy groups to continue pushing for reform, while Alicia focused on her recovery and preparing for the arrival of her baby. One afternoon, as Alicia sat on her porch, she felt a sense of closure. The past few weeks had been some of the most challenging of her life, but she knew she had made a difference. Her story had sparked a movement, proving that courage and unity could overcome even the greatest challenges. Marcus joined her on the porch, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "You did it, Alicia," he said, handing her a glass. "We did it," she corrected him, smiling. As they looked out at the peaceful neighborhood, they felt a renewed sense of hope. The fight wasn't over, but they knew they were stronger together.